We are so glad that you're with us this evening. We want to just give you a couple of quick to-dos. If you need the closed captioning, you can turn on the closed captioning by looking for the little C at the bottom of your screen, and you can turn on the closed captioning if you need to do that. We will be sending the recording as we have done for the entire series. So if you need to excuse yourself before the end, don't worry, we'll be sending you the recording along with all of the resources that we're using this evening. So we're going to jump right in because we have a lot of content to cover this evening. And again, thank you for being here. Next slide. And you can just go on and click through all three of those. We are going to get started and cover our agenda for this evening. We are going to do three things this evening. We're going to discuss the foundations for the deep canvassing conversations. We're going to review some of the content just briefly that we have covered over the first two nights. So far, we've done a lot already. We've talked about how to get the conversation started. We've talked about empathetic listening. We've talked a little bit, and you've done some homework about how to create your story. We're going to dig down a little bit with that today, and how to create your vision. And then we're going to dig in today a little bit more about how to reconcile conflicting views that may happen when you're talking to people during your deep canvassing. And then, of course, in some deep canvassing conversations, there's a call to action or an ask. Of course, that's in some deep canvassing conversations, not in all. And then we're going to have some practice. Now, before we get started with our content this evening, we want to let you know about what's coming up next week. Next week, we're going to put all of these skills together that we have learned into practice by talking to some voters, a couple of voters who and tell you a little bit about the voters that we're going to talk to. These are folks who voted in 2020, but who don't typically vote. Now, we know that these voters are going to be likely targets of Republican voter suppression tactics, and we want to hear from them. We know that here in the South, and we're all from the South, that voter suppression is a unifying theme and an issue across the South. And we want to talk to voters to find out about what's happening and what they're experiencing. So that's what's coming up next week. You'll also, and we're only going to talk to a couple of voters, and that is to put into practice some of the deep canvassing skills that we're learning. Next week, you'll also learn how you can how you can get support and build deep canvassing teams in your own communities around the issues that you care about. Now, groups in Texas and Georgia may choose to continue to talk to voters about voter suppression. If you're a group leader in North Carolina, you may choose to talk to communities about the horrendous attacks that are going on at school board meetings around critical race theory. If, for example, though, you are in Alabama, you might be just flabbergasted and frustrated about your governor's choice to use COVID relief funds to build 2 prisons instead of putting that money into schools instead or something. So you'll be able to build deep canvassing teams about issues that are important to you and your communities at a very micro, almost neighborhood level. Now, you may also choose, you may also find that these deep canvassing conversations are simply beneficial to you in talking to your community, to your friends and family, or maybe even just at Thanksgiving dinner. However you choose to use these skills, we know that they will be beneficial to you. So next slide. Now, we'd like to begin this evening by showing you a real life example of a deep canvassing conversation. We didn't get to this last week, but we were so excited about sharing this clip with you. We're using it a little differently this time. Again, this conversation, as we told you last week, was part of the 2008 fight for marriage equality in California. You, as you watch this 2-minute clip, will recognize some of the language from the script that we used last week. Now, as you watch the video this time, I'd like for you to not just think about, well, last time we were going to move forward in the conversation guide, and we're going to use this script for that purpose, but we're going to use it as review as well. So as you listen to this video, I want you to use this as an opportunity to think back on all of the skills that you've learned so far. So as you listen to the video, think about the introduction. Hold on, I'm sorry. Go to the next slide.
This is our interesting moment where we're going to shift to Abby sharing for a moment to share the video.
Yes. You're going to be listening to for the introduction. I'm sorry. This is where we were a little late because we had some technical difficulties. So we're going to hope that this works. And before you start the video, Abby, just give me 1 second. We're going to hope this works, because you're going to love this video. Anyway, as you listen and watch this video, listen for the introduction. In the introduction, if you remember, one of the very important things that you do is build rapport. The video is going to begin just after the beginning. So you're not going to hear the very beginning, but it will be obvious that the canvasser has done the work of building rapport. You'll see evidence that rapport has been established. Also listen for empathetic listening skills that the canvasser uses. Also listen for how the canvasser defines the problem of marriage equality and how the canvasser uncovers the voter's experience. Then listen for how the canvasser reconciles conflicting views and that the voter has, and how the canvasser helps address concerns that the voter might have. Then also pay attention to how the canvasser weaves in very artfully the personal story that helps address the concerns that the voter has. Then listen for the transition from the personal story to the call to action. And if you remember how we listened to the concerns of the voter, but tried to identify the needs that were underneath that concern. So as you listen to this 2-minute video, try to pay attention to those things. And then on the other side of the video, we're going to come back and talk about it. And I think you're going to be very moved at the type of conversation that you listen to. And let's cross our fingers. I think I see the video, so I think it's going to work.
Yes. Okay. So hopefully y'all can see my screen. I can't see any of you, so I am going to look for a yes in the chat from someone when I hit play to signal that you can hear and see the video all right. And type in the chat, please, or just speak out loud if there are issues. But I'm gonna hit play, and thanks y'all for being patient with my mediocre tech abilities. We all have our strengths, right?
We're talking to folks about marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Do you remember that being on the ballot in 2008? Okay.
Prop 8?
Yeah, and do you remember how you voted on it?
We didn't vote.
You didn't vote. Okay. What would you say like is on the side for you that's holding you back from supporting it? You know, I'm just trying to understand better.
Basically, I kind of didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, sure. You want to do the right thing.
Now you're making me think about this. I happen to have a cousin who's lesbian that I love very much, and she's been with another woman for like about 20 years.
Oh, wow, that's a long time.
So I don't have any prejudice towards that.
What's your cousin's name?
Her name is Jill.
Jill. Okay. So it seems like Jill would be real happy, right, if she could get married.
They'd like to, especially they're going through financial troubles.
Yeah, it's helpful.
And I believe this stuff. See, I get emotional about this.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, it seems like it's really hard decision.
Well, when it comes to health issues and stuff.
What? Just curious. Why does it, make you feel so emotional?
Because right now you can't do things for each other.
Yeah. That's gotta be really hard. And I
Sorry.
see how much you love and care for them. And for a lot of folks, it's about protecting this sort of idea of man, woman, and things like that. But for us, it's about protecting each other.
Yeah, you told me tonight when you were bringing that stuff up, and I realized that about my cousins, as much as I love them and stuff. I don't know that I take it in internally as much.
Yeah.
That's like you're saying about voting. Why didn't I? And now, because it wasn't something that was really super personal to me.
Sure. We're going to be voting on this again in the future. I mean, what do you think would be the right thing to do?
I would vote for gays to be able to legally get married.
And why does that feel right to you?
Because I think if two people love each other, they love each other, the ones who are couples. Yeah. And I respect that.
So this is an excerpt of probably a 20-minute conversation. But just in the small clip 2-minute portion of this conversation that you were able to see, what are some of your thoughts about the nature of the conversation? We've got a small enough group. If you have some comments that you'd like to make, raise your hand or just put in chat that you'd like to comment. But the first hand I saw was Anne. Please come off mute.
I did. Okay, I was looking for a hand to throw up, but you saw that. So it was a very personal conversation. And had he not had someone in his family that he obviously cared for deeply, the conversation would have been very different. And nor would it perhaps have been so transformative to him or for the deep canvasser. This is a very successful interchange. So I personally don't think that I would go out into the field with that expectation. That would be a rare thing, but clearly she got him to the point of allowing that emotional response to come up. Did he know he was being videoed?
I can't honestly answer that question, but I would imagine for ethical reasons that they would not ever consider secretly videotaping. Yeah, well, I would just imagine ethically you wouldn't do that. Thank you so much for your comment. And Michael. Michael, you're on mute. What's your notice about the types of questions that they asked? Anyone? Just Edie? Is it?
Yeah.
Did I hear?
Yeah, you said it right. They were open-ended questions. It was about how does he feel about it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So Edie, thank you for that response. Karen, your comment in the chat, and I am trying to remember it. You said that they were incredibly open with their answers and willing to respond. That kind of reminded me of a comment that someone made last time about, you know, the questions seemed probative and almost intrusive, and they kind of felt like maybe people wouldn't respond. Can you respond to what you said in reference to the comment that was made last week? Can you maybe expound on your comment a little bit? Karen, I think that was your comment in the chat. If you want to. I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's okay if you don't want to, that's fine. So one last question. And last week we talked about the balance between listening and talking. We gave a number, but I don't think the number is so important. But what do you notice about the balance between the amount of time Jackson, who was the canvasser, what do you notice about the balance between the amount of time Jackson listened versus the amount of time Jackson talked?
Allowed the voter much time, did not interrupt.
Absolutely. So the rule of thumb is that you listen 70% of the time and only talk 30% of the time. And one of the most powerful statements I've heard in a training about deep canvassing is that the most powerful words, it's not about us convincing a voter, but the most powerful words that a voter will ever hear in terms of them being convinced is their own words. Their own words are the most convincing words they will ever hear. Let's go to, I think, the next slide. One more comment. One more thing I wanted to point out about getting to the emotional needs of the voter. So one of the things that we want to do is to get beneath. So when a voter raises a concern, we want to listen to the concern, but we want to really try to get at the emotional need beneath that. And we talked a lot about that last week. And one of the emotional, so the concern that the voter had was he didn't vote because he said, I didn't vote because I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to mess anything up. What do you think was the emotional need underneath that concern? Just you raise your hand or unmute and just yell it out. That's fine. Lawrence.
I think you worried that he might be criticized or drawn into a commotion, into battle,
Okay.
unwillingly.
Okay. Fear. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Other people said fear. Do you think he might have been afraid? So Jackson took that question and said, yeah, it sounds like you didn't want to make a bad decision. Do you think that that might have been a reason why the voter didn't vote? Could be kind of afraid to make a bad choice, so just didn't do anything at all. So
Staying in
Um,
your own comfort zone and not rocking the boat is a lot easier than getting yourself into challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as powerful as an example as this is, we there are so many powerful examples of deep canvassing conversations. We really just wanted to make sure that you saw an example of the marriage equality deep canvassing conversation that we used last time, so that you could see it in real time. One thing you didn't see was like the scale. They use this in the longer conversation, but you didn't get a chance to see that. But one thing to keep in mind, these deep canvassing conversations were hugely successful in this last election in terms of moving voters away from voting for Donald Trump. These deep canvassing conversations work. The research shows that they work. And so what we know is that if we want to change voters' minds, it is these kinds of conversations that really make the difference. So attacks on the freedom to vote is a unifying challenge that we're seeing across the South. We're seeing all sorts of attacks. We're going to pivot now away from marriage equality for the remainder of this training to focus, just for the training, on examples involving voter suppression. Again, these are just examples for the purpose of the remainder of this training. And your groups, again, are absolutely able to choose issues that are relevant to you and to your area, and to introduce this campaign.
Enough.
I'm sorry?
It wasn't.
To introduce this to you, I'm going to turn it over to my co-facilitator, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Oh, I was on the wrong thing before. Trying to advance a slide here. Here we go. So this time we're going to look at a campaign message for our voter suppression campaign. Remember, after these training series, you may choose to continue deep canvassing campaigns focused on combating voter suppression, and others may pivot to issues that you care about, or you may find yourself using these strategies in your personal conversations. For the purposes of tonight, though, we're going to keep our efforts and focus on combating the attacks on voting rights. And we left off at sharing that campaign message. So for a little bit of context, we want to remind you that 425 voter suppression bills have been introduced since January 6th insurrection, with, of course, the South leading the way on that, and then Texas and Georgia being right there in our front lines. So what we want to learn tonight, I have lost my place, is about, the personal connection we all have to voting, and the personal connection that this person you're speaking to has to their voting practices. So we may want to know if their loved ones have experienced unreasonable obstacles to voting. And finally, we want to know how likely they are to vote in future elections and why. We help the voter reconcile their conflicting views and address their concerns. We don't do this by offering a list of facts and rebuttals. Remember, facts don't really change those opinions and those things, the way we feel about things. One way to do this is to connect with the voter by sharing a personal story that connects to the voter's lived experience. So having a couple of stories in your back pocket to choose from really helps with this step. And back to you for a minute, Kim. You're on mute still.
I'm on mute. Yeah, thank you. So last week, last session, I should say, you were given a homework assignment to work on a personal story that was designed to help you create a story about a situation where you felt like your voice wasn't heard. I'm going to share with you in just a minute a similar story to show you as an example. Let's see here. Let me pull my story out.
It's on the screen for you, Kim.
I know, but I can't read it.
Okay.
All right. I'm pulling it up on my screen. All right, there we go. I'm going to read a story to you, and you will see that it is, it's a true story. It is a story that is when we develop stories, they are in 4 parts. And as I read it to you, I would like for you to listen to the 4 parts. There is obviously an introductory story statement. There is the personal story part. You'll want to use the same prompting questions that you would on the doors or on the phone. That doesn't really matter. And then there's a hope statement. And the hope statement is how we are going to relate our vision for the world, or for how it would change. And it sounds a little hocus pocus right now, but it will make sense to you in just a minute. And then we end with a question. That question is super important because it's like a hinge. The story gets us back and it creates a transition for us with the voter that helps us get back to a very critical part of our story. And so as I read it, listen to those 4 parts. Now, I'm going to note that my example does have to do with voter suppression. It's an example that happened to me in my real life involving my son and voter suppression. I know that if you did your homework, you may not have a story that deals exactly with voter suppression, and that's okay. You can connect with voters with your story about a time where your voice didn't matter. You felt like your voice didn't matter, or you felt like you were excluded, because those are the feelings that voters will be experiencing. So as you listen to my story, I don't want you to feel discouraged that your story may not be about voter suppression. That's okay. So as someone who volunteers for voter protection, I never thought I would personally experience it happening to my own son. My son went to vote and told the poll worker that he didn't have his ID. He knew that he was supposed to be allowed to vote with a provisional ballot, but he was told no over and over again. I watched from the sidelines just to see what would happen. He spoke to several poll workers and eventually to the head election official. And each time he was told that he would not be allowed to vote. He finally asked if there was no way that he could vote, and he was told no each time. After 15 minutes, I stepped in and I asked why he was not being allowed to vote with a provisional ballot. Even I was told no. I told the head election official that I was going to report this incident, and I pulled out my cell phone. And he asked if I was one of those activists. And immediately he allowed my son to vote. The Board of Elections immediately came out and retrained the staff. and immediately retrain the staff. Now, I've done poll watching for presidential candidates in other states, and I was mortified to think that this happened to my son at my own voting precinct. Who knows how many other young men that look like my son have been turned away from the polls and made to feel like their voice didn't matter. I hope one day that we have a system where it is easy for people to vote and they don't have to jump through hoops to exercise their most fundamental right. Can you imagine? I can't see that. Can you imagine what our country could be like if everyone had a right to vote? That frustrates me even to just read it now. But we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to look at the same story color coded. It takes me back to that same day, so I'm not going to get stuck there. But if you look at the story, you'll see that the introductory statement there is in white, where I talk about me having been having volunteered at the polls. Then in yellow, when I talk about what happened, the core part of my story. Then when I talk about my hope for how things, or my vision for how things could be, that part is in blue. And then the final question there is in green. So again, I don't want you to think as you work on your stories that your story has to be about voter suppression as we prepare to talk to voters next week. Voters are going to be experiencing feelings like their voice doesn't matter, or they feel excluded. So as long as you have a story where at some time you felt like your story, like your voice didn't matter, or you were excluded, you'll be able to connect with voters. So we'd like to hear from you about what you think works with that story in a voter suppression type of deep canvassing conversation. What would work? Why would that story work in a deep canvassing type conversation? Just raise your hand or just unmute, and you're welcome to just. Why would a story, a personal story, why do personal stories or a personal story like that, why would a story like that work in a deep canvassing conversation? Pat, is your hand up?
Yes. I think because in a sense you've become vulnerable, you've shared this story. You're not threatening people or telling them you're wrong. You're saying in a deep felt way, this is my experience. And I think just like that previous example where she was so respectful of his feelings, I think people would just sit back and take that in gently.
Mm-hmm. 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 Edie says personal experience and eliciting emotion. Joanna, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was going to say too that there's there's an enormous difference between believing something and knowing something. Mm-hmm. And I could tell you stories that my Black friends had with voter suppression that are just appalling, that all of my Black friends had. But but you actually know it. I believe it, but you actually know it, mm-hmm. And that really resonates more with people.
Yeah, yeah. One more comment, Michael.
Working now? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. You know, in my neighborhood, I'm just as likely to be told, I don't want anybody voting without ID. What's the problem?
Mhm. That's a very good point. Keep in mind the voters that, for the purpose of this training, the voters that we're going to be talking to are not those voters.
Okay.
We're not going to be talking to them. No offense.
No, this is my first meeting, so you're talking about likely Democrat voters.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We're going to be talking to
Withdraw that
people.
statement then. Thank you.
Right. But they're also going to be those same voters who are the poor, students, people of color, who are likely going to be those voters who are who the Republicans will be trying to who are going to be Republican targets for voter suppression. The ones they'll try to get off the voting rolls, the ones they will try to make it difficult to vote, reducing hours, you know, eliminating souls to the polls, all of the shenanigans that they play. So Rachel is giving me the sign that says I'm getting off task. You all don't see those subtle signs, but I talk too much. And if I answer your question, I'm going to get in trouble. So we promise that we will be sticking around, but I am really bad about talking too much. And we're getting ready to move in to having some time for you all to work on your personal stories. And I want to make sure that I impress upon you, you don't need a story about experiencing voter suppression. All right. You don't need to talk about your friend of color. You don't need to, you have a story where you have personally felt like your voice didn't matter. That will connect with a voter. So I'm going to just talk really quickly here. We're going to do some solo work. We're not going in groups. We're just going to work quietly here together at our tables. This is teacher and me. We're just going to work quietly at our desk, boys and girls. You're going to spend this time one of three ways. If you didn't do your homework last week, then you're going to spend 5 minutes working on your personal story. Thinking of a time where you felt your voice didn't matter, or you felt like you were excluded. And we're going to drop, Lauren has dropped the document in the chat that helps walk you through how to develop your story. If you are one of the really good kids and you did your homework already, you can practice sharing your story. Or you can think of another story. It's really good to have a couple of those stories in your back pocket. So when you're talking to voters, you can just pull them out, just like Jackson did. So you can practice your story. You can think of another story, or you can take 5 minutes. We're going to take 5 minutes and we're going to work on our stories. So you can practice your story. You can write another story, or you could take 5 minutes, or you can work on your story if you didn't do it. And it is 8:14. And we're going to give you 5 minutes right now. We're just going to go on mute, and we're going to give you, it's 8:15. We're going to give you 5 minutes. So 8:20 is when we're going to stop working. So we're just going to go on mute, and we're going to give you 5 minutes to work.
Raquel, when does this session end this evening?
Well, technically it ends at 9 o'clock, but we always hang out, and
yeah,
for some reason we were here together till 10 o'clock last
I'm
night.
sure you're going to be here. And I thank you. We thank you so much. Okay, great. I'm just curious. And we thank you so much. We love you.
Yeah, we love you too. So we're going to go on mute, and we're just going to work quietly for 5 minutes. And then after this, you're going to practice telling each other your stories.
So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to give you a chance to practice in groups of 3. So we're going to take turns sharing just your story. none of the other parts of the larger conversation yet. So if you're in groups of 3, we want you to spend maybe about 5 minutes kind of sharing each of your stories, and then about 5 minutes at the end to give each other some feedback on how your stories felt. So you'll have 20 minutes in breakout, 5 minutes for each person's story, and 20 minutes to kind of debrief and feel if you've kind of gotten all of those components touched on. And Kimberly, are you up and ready to launch those breakouts?
I am.
All right, we'll see everybody in a moment. Okay, people starting to come back and joining us again. Thank you. And you may have noticed we kind of shortened that time down a little bit. We tried to give you a little warning there in the chat box, just to try to keep us on track. We did send you out for just 15 instead of 20. Bear with us. We're trying to stay on time today. And I think everyone's back. Are they all? Great. So how was it? Any great interactions that occurred that felt very meaningful? Someone that got their story just spot on, all the elements there. If you want to drop a note in the chat here. I'm gonna have a hard time seeing hands up, but if you'd like to share something that went fantastic, either in the chat or say you want to come off mute and let us know. Thank you for that feedback, Jane. We were trying. Great. Okay, so let's move on to what happens after the story. So we're going to enter this next skill building portion for the night and pass that back to Kim.
Thank you.
I see Gary says 2 of the 3 of us felt that their experience did not dovetail with the question, and that happens. That happens. But you'll want to dovetail it to in a way that connects with the voter in that moment. So whatever the issue may have been. Okay. Kimberly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So if you remember from the video, the question at the end helps draw the voter out and find out where the voter stands. And I think this may be addressing the question that you just asked, Eva. Typically, once you shared your story, the question at the end is something that draws out where the voter stands now. And we spend some time hearing where the voter is. Next slide. If you get the sense that the voter hasn't moved, then the goal is to encourage the voter to reconcile the 2 stories that were just shared. The story you uncovered while they were describing their needs and experiences with the topic, whatever the topic is, and the story that you shared offering your vision. Your goal is to help reconcile those two visions. Let's take an example. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Let's say, next slide. Let's say in this example, someone says, I just don't feel like, in the voter suppression example, let's say someone says, I just don't feel like my vote matters. Nothing's going to change anyway. If we were going to respond, we want to respond with a 3-part formula. First, we want to empathize with the need behind what they're saying. We want to answer briefly to set the record straight very gently. And then we want to redirect by asking a question that ideally brings it back to whatever their needs are. In our example, it might look something like this. I hear you. It's difficult to stay engaged when you feel your voice doesn't matter anyway. You'll briefly answer, not, for example, Not everyone has the kind of job where they can stand in a long line, much less come back twice if they don't allow you to vote the first time. And then your redirect would be, do you think it would be different if you believed government was actually helpful in solving local problems that impact you, your everyday life? That might be a good redirect. Now, the thing is with the redirect is that it only works if you really got the voter to talk about the reasons why they don't vote frequently. And if you think back to the marriage equality example, the voter talked about why he didn't vote. He didn't vote because he didn't want to make the mistake. He was he expressed that he didn't want to make a mistake voting, and then it was easy to help transition transition to I understand that. It sounds like you just didn't want to make a mistake. So that last question is very, very important. So let's review really quickly the parts of reconciling and conflicting views. You want to empathize and affirm, not their problematic viewpoint, but the need behind what they're saying. You want to answer briefly. It can be easy to get stuck there. And that's where things can kind of get contentious when you're talking. You don't want to be overstating facts. We keep saying, facts don't change people. You only want to say enough to set the record straight, and then you want to redirect and bring the conversation back to your canvassing goal. Ideally, their need and whatever their need is, and back to an open-ended question. Next slide. Now, it's okay not to know what to say when you're at a door. With deep canvassing, you're not going to have a clipboard with a list of rebuttals. And if they say this, you say that. Your goal is to get them talking. This is just an example. You're not going to always have, the exact answer to say, the statistics and facts right at the top of your head. In all likelihood, you're going to walk away from a door and think of something that you could have said or something that you could have shared. But when you get home and you're having coffee 30 minutes later, you'll think of a story that you could have shared that might have made a difference. And that's okay. The important thing is that sometimes you have to change course during a conversation. From my experience, the more you talk to voters, the easier it gets. It's overwhelming sometimes at first, but just understand why you're making understand the campaign goal, why you're making the phone calls, why you're talking to voters, why you're knocking on doors, depending on how you're reaching out to people. And don't get stuck on individual conversations. Keep the broader picture in mind. It can be overwhelming at first, but just keep the broader picture in mind. And now that brings us to the final step, and I'm going to kick it over to Rachel.
The final piece of making our case, or a call to action. So this final step, a call to action, sometimes there will be an ask like, can we count on you to vote for this candidate or against this ballot initiative? Sometimes you'll simply be canvassing to find out what issues are important to your community, and there won't be an ask at all. Those that have taken part in a formal deep canvassing operation knows that it's very common to use a numerical rating system. A rating system respects that the voters' opinions fall along a continuum and communicates that there's no real right or wrong answer. We simply are asking them to share why that number feels right for them. Here's an example of a rating system for what we'll use for our voter suppression campaign, where 0 will be, I absolutely will not vote, or 10 will be, I absolutely will vote. And when you see, you know, there's that continuum in there. And there we go. I'm going to pull all those up. We're going to have one more breakout. We're not going to do 30 minutes though. And what we'll do,
10.
Yeah, what we'll do is we just want to give you some time to practice this. And I think Abby's going to drop a link for our voter suppression framework. And this would be kind of the script we'll be using for the phone bank. Scripts would change a little bit if you're at the door, but we want to give you the opportunity to pair up. And so if you have that star next to your name, of course, we will honor that and not send you into breakout. And the details of the campaign are at the top of the handout if you need a little reminder of anything. And we want to focus on engaging with that medium hard pushback from the voter's end. So if you're role playing as the voter, don't be too hard. We want this to feel productive. But don't be too easy either. We want it to, you know, you do want to challenge the skill. So Abby, I'm going to ask you to drop, because we are getting close to the end. Next week.
Hey, if you are still here, sorry, my internet is being really bizarre. So if someone else could, that would be great. Thanks.
No worries, I got it.
Yes, dropping what?
And those of you who stick around, Rachel and I will be reading through the conversation guide here so that you can hear how the script goes that we'll be using next week. She didn't know that, but.
What did y'all need me to drop?
Okay, I just got it. No worries, Lauren. Just dropped it in the chat for everyone. Thanks for your
All right. Opening up the rooms now.
Thank you all, first of all, for sticking around with us for 3 sessions so far. And we will take a moment in the kind of like after party area to debrief those conversations that you had just now in the chat about how that felt and maybe what challenges did emerge. But before we close out for the night, we have some links that we need to drop. The registration link for our next event and Kimberly, is there a survey link that needs to go in? And
nope, we're all set.
Awesome. All right. And oh, I see reconciling conflicting views was the most difficult. Absolutely. Absolutely, Peggy. But again, next week we will be diving into this in real time. We will make some time within our call to call some voters in Texas, and we will set you up for success beforehand, and then we will have a space for conversation afterwards to see, kind of debrief that and talk about how to get you started with your own canvassing in your communities.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording and open up the space afterwards for us to engage and talk a little bit and see how this is going for everyone.